She is incapable of handling her own finances, Your Honor. She's disoriented, unpredictable, and a risk to her own well-being. My father didn't hesitate for a second while feeding lies to the judge. He dabbed at an insincere tear, eyeing the family members he'd brought along to witness my disgrace. I didn't shout. I didn't protest. I simply glanced at my watch. 3 minutes. That was all the time remaining before his carefully constructed life came crashing down. Be honest, has anyone ever stared straight into your eyes and fabricated lies about you just to paint themselves as the injured party? Drop a yes below if you felt that exact sting. I'd like to know how many of us have made it through this. Walter took his seat, adjusting his tie as though he'd just given a heartfelt tribute. The courtroom fell into a dense hush, loaded with the disapproval radiating from the aunts and cousins he'd crammed into the rear seats. They were anticipating my collapse. They expected Rithi, the 29-year-old disappointment, the family embarrassment, the bewildered girl, to erupt in hysterics or plead for compassion. But I remained still. I didn't flinch. I simply sat, inhaling the musty courtroom atmosphere, allowing the quiet to expand until it unnerved everyone except me, Ms. Rithi. Judge Morrison peered over her spectacles. Your father has presented grave accusations concerning your mental competence and your administration of the estate. Do you wish to reply? Walter edged forward, like a hunter sensing weakness. He craved the explosion. He required me to validate his claims by becoming frantic. Emotional turmoil was the fuel he lived on. If I yelled, he triumphed. If I wept, he triumphed. So I offered him emptiness. I rose deliberately, straightening the front of my jacket. I avoided the spectators. I didn't yet face the judge. My gaze locked onto Walter alone. My expression stayed utterly neutral, no trace of rage, dread, or sorrow. Psychologists label this the gray rock technique. You transform into rock. You turn dull, unreactive, emotionless. You deprive the narcissist of the drama they crave to survive, yet Walter failed to grasp that my stillness wasn't defeat. It was deliberate. I stayed quiet because I was capturing everything. Ms. Rithi, the judge urged once more. I'm all ears, Your Honor, I replied, tone steady and soft. I'm simply allowing my father to complete his list of complaints. I'd hate to disrupt his act. For a split instant, Walter's smug grin wavered. He muttered something to his attorney, Stephen. Stephen wasn't grinning. Stephen was perspiring. He drummed his pen nervously on his notepad, a habit I'd spotted 3 months back when I began monitoring their actions. Stephen understood something Walter overlooked: documents create evidence trails, and he knew precisely which papers they'd falsified to secure this proceeding. I shifted my eyes back to Walter. He radiated assurance, conceit, inflated by the falsehood he'd peddled to the relatives for years, that he was the weary head of a failing lineage, while I was the flaw letting everything collapse. He believed he was moments from obtaining legal guardianship over me and control of the remaining $5 million in the estate. He figured total dominance was within reach. A frigid, piercing focus crystallized inside me. It was pure adrenaline. It felt like a snare closing. He mistook my silence for capitulation. He had no clue it was the click of a rifle's crosshairs aligning. Go ahead, I said, easing back into my chair. Let's continue, Your Honor. Consider her way of living, Walter scoffed, motioning toward me as if I were filth. She resides in a tiny flat in the roughest neighborhood. She shops at bargain bins for clothing. She rides public transit because she can't buy a vehicle. She's wasted every chance I handed her. I let him catalog my supposed shortcomings like items on a shopping list. Yet my thoughts traveled back 2 years. I recalled his surprise visit to my place. He'd surveyed my 300-square-foot unit with utter contempt. This is humiliating, ratty, he'd sneered, nudging a pile of novels with his foot. I assure my acquaintances you're exploring options. But truthfully, you're simply floundering. Then he sped off in his fresh Porsche Cayenne, a vehicle I later discovered he'd financed using my social security details. He never suspected my modest space was intentional. While he splurged on $5,000 outfits to impress those who despised him, I was quietly compiling a hidden record. Each insult calling me useless prompted me to shift another $5,000 into an overseas investment fund. Each jab at my dull data entry position ignored that I actually oversaw a $15 million portfolio for private equity groups. I wasn't penniless. I was accumulating. I wasn't crumbling. I was acquiring. He assumed I rode buses because a basic sedan was out of reach. Truthfully, I channeled my cash flow into buying the troubled mortgage on his cherished country club privileges. When he ridiculed my second-hand Blazer, I was completing the acquisition of the holding entity that controlled the lien against his commercial property. He viewed a daughter requiring supervision. I viewed an obligation ripe for elimination. She lacks any grasp of fiscal prudence, Walter bellowed, pounding the table. I studied him, truly studied him. This wasn't paternal worry. This was a leech frantic that its supply was vanishing. He sought conservatorship not from affection. He sought it because debt was swallowing him, and I remained his sole lifeline. He craved authority over my holdings because he'd already exhausted his own. He wasn't acting as a father. He was a hunter, and that erased any remorse on my part. Had I been merely his child, I might have paused, perhaps offered one final rescue. But today I wasn't his offspring. Today I was his lender, and this wasn't a family gathering. It was repossession. Is that everything, Mr. Walter? Judge Morrison inquired, her pen scraping audibly across paper. No, Walter replied, eyes lighting up. He nodded toward Stephen. We possess undeniable evidence of her incapacity. Stephen rose, his seat dragging harshly across the floor like an alert. He avoided my gaze. He approached the bench and presented a hefty bundle of financial statements to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, Stephen began, voice quivering faintly, we submit documentation concerning the mishandling of the trust created by the deceased grandmother, particularly the main distribution account. Walter couldn't restrain himself. He interrupted, jabbing a trembling finger my way. She squandered it, Judge. She misplaced $750,000 and barely registered it. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. My aunts gripped their necklaces. My cousins traded shocked looks. To them, $750,000 represented wealth. To Walter, it was the final barrier against ruin. Clarify, Judge Morrison ordered, scanning the documents. Her expression remained neutral. Examine the movements, Walter yelled, dropping any facade of restraint. Across the past 2 years, massive amounts exited that account, $50,000 here, $80,000 there. All routed to obscure entities. All impossible to follow. And she took no action. No reports to authorities. No security notifications. Zero. He pivoted toward the onlookers, performing for his crowd. My daughter is so detached, so out of touch with reality, she permitted a criminal to empty her legacy. Without intervention, she'll be homeless within half a year. I observed his display. It was skillfully done. In a twisted sense. He recast his own embezzlement as my negligence. He counted on the assumption that no rational individual would allow such sums to disappear silently, thus I had to be irrational. Thus he deserved authority. We move for emergency relief, Stephen continued, dabbing perspiration from his lip. We seek an immediate asset freeze and Walter's temporary appointment as conservator to halt the losses. Walter glanced at me then. Not with worry. With victory. He believed he'd trapped me. He viewed the vanished funds as conclusive proof of my unfitness. He failed to see they were the lure. He was correct on one count, the money had vanished. But he misjudged the oversight. He presumed I was too dim to monitor statements. He presumed I remained the timid girl he once tormented over meals. Miss Ruthie, Judge Morrison intoned gravely. These files indicate substantial erosion of assets. Can you account for the destination of these funds? The chamber turned eerily quiet. Walter reclined, arms folded. He anticipated my stammer. He anticipated tears and ignorance. He anticipated triumph. I rose. I ignored my notes. I ignored my attorney. I lifted the lone blue folder I'd set on the table at the hearing's outset. I lack an excuse, Your Honor, I stated plainly. I possess a blueprint. I approached the bench and laid the folder before Judge Morrison. I moved unhurriedly. I proceeded with the measured pace of someone familiar with the conclusion because they authored it. My father speaks accurately, Your Honor, I said, half turning toward the spectators. The funds are gone. $750,000 exited that trust. I monitored every dollar depart. Walter released a harsh laugh. She confesses. She observed it unfold and stayed idle. She's detached from reality. I wasn't detached, I countered, my tone slicing cleanly through his bluster. I was deliberate. Judge Morrison flipped open the folder. Her gaze widened at the initial sheet. It wasn't figures. It was a diagram. A digital trail map. Ms. Ruthie, the judge inquired, glancing upward. What does this represent? You are viewing the IP records tied to each illicit transfer, I clarified. I didn't merely follow the currency. I followed the source machine. Every operation stemmed from one desktop at 442 Oakwood Drive, my father's residence. Specifically, his private office. Color fled Walter. Face. He began rising. Stephen jerked him downward. That's illegally obtained data. Walter stammered. She invented it. And here, I pressed on, indicating the following page and disregarding him, are the transfer receipts. Notice the destinations weren't arbitrary fronts. They flowed into accounts belonging to Apex Consulting, a firm registered in Nevis. I faced Walter. A firm you established 3 years prior, under your mistress's birth surname. The spectators erupted. My aunt inhaled sharply. Walter appeared struck. His lips parted soundlessly. He grasped, belatedly, that I hadn't overlooked his embezzlement. I had catalogued it meticulously. But why? Judge Morrison demanded, quieting the room with an upheld palm. If you recognized the theft, Ms. Ruthie, why not secure the account? Why permit nearly $1 million to disappear? This was the pivotal instant. The lure tactic. Because of legal thresholds, Your Honor, I answered. Halting him at $50,000 would have confined it to a domestic disagreement. A private issue. He'd face minimal consequences, perhaps probation. He'd return to my orbit within months, scheming anew. I met Walter's eyes. I needed him to comprehend his self-engineered downfall. I required him to escalate from minor pilfering to organized federal crime. I intentionally deactivated alerts. I left access unsecured. I waited until the pilfered total surpassed $500,000 and the wires traversed jurisdictions. I leaned in, palms flat on the table. That pattern establishes interstate wire fraud, activating RICO provisions. The required minimum term is 10 years in federal custody. No early release. No leniency. Walter sagged in his seat. He appeared diminished. He resembled someone realizing he hadn't robbed an institution, he'd invaded a snare. I didn't lose $750,000, Dad, I stated, voice icy and conclusive. I invested it. That sum purchased your incarceration. Honestly? A fair trade. Walter was ensnared. Yet a cornered rodent grows most vicious. He mopped sweat from his brow with trembling fingers and delved into his briefcase. He withdrew a lone, slightly discolored page. "She's fabricating," he declared, voice regaining force. "She approved each movement. She simply forgot." He passed the sheet to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. Walter addressed the onlookers, assurance surging back. "This is a notarized power of attorney, executed 2 years past. It expressly authorizes me to oversee the precise trust for family holdings." She executed it shortly after her grandmother's passing, overwhelmed by grief and unprepared for fiscal duties. Judge Morrison inspected it. She furrowed her brow. "The signature appears genuine." "It is genuine," Walter affirmed, grinning for the first time in minutes. "She signed willingly. She merely lacks recollection. This validates my assertion, Your Honor. Her recall is impaired. She fabricates elaborate RICO delusions because she cannot accept she granted consent." The atmosphere shifted once more. I noticed cousins murmuring. Perhaps he spoke truth. Perhaps confusion gripped her. Even Stephen, the anxious counsel, straightened, hope flickering. If valid, the transfers became legitimate stewardship. My RICO strategy dissolved. The trap became pointless. Judge Morrison regarded me. "Miss Rithey. Is this your signature?" I identified the form immediately. 2 years prior, hidden among condolence documents. Walter had slid it before me. I'd signed blindly, a blunder that ignited conflict. "It resembles my signature," I conceded. Walter seized the moment. "See? She concedes. Forgetfulness. She requires oversight." He believed victory secured. I permitted the fantasy one heartbeat. Then I retrieved a second folder from my bag. "That instrument grants authority over one account," I informed him evenly. "It grants no shelter." I unveiled reality. I'd discreetly acquired his professional building. Rent had lapsed for months. Eviction proceedings commenced that morning. I'd also secured the mortgage on his residence. "I hold your workplace. I hold your residence. I hold your obligations," I declared. "You arrived seeking guardianship. You depart as my lessee." He disintegrated. The courtroom witnessed his pride shatter. I extended a withdrawal and admission form across the table. "Sign. 30 days to vacate. Refuse, and locks engage by midday." He signed, grumbling that I'd forever owe him. The doors flew apart. Federal agents stormed in alongside the U.S. attorney. Walter faced immediate detention. Perjury had triggered a sealed indictment I'd flagged months before. No one rose to his defense as they removed him. Outside, the air seemed purer. I completed the residence transaction, erased his contact, and departed. Tranquility isn't bestowed. You claim it. And occasionally, the mightiest action is permitting them to entomb themselves.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a twist. Stay tuned to Reddit Tales Times for your daily dose of drama, laughs, and unbelievable stories.